The crystalline nexus of the Volcari hegemony was a construct not merely of architecture, but of cold, relentless philosophy, an artifact of stability that had endured the slow, indifferent heat death of minor stars, its existence a testament to the supreme logic of classification and the ultimate triumph of order over the primordial, chaotic soup of the cosmos. Within the central chamber, a vast, echoing space where light was not reflected but meticulously refracted to prevent even the slightest visual impurity, the High Council of Arbiters convened, their faceted, obsidian-like carapaces shimmering with the stored residual energies of millennia. Their collective presence generated a low, rhythmic hum, the sonic expression of absolute political and intellectual equilibrium. A fragile, necessary sound now threatened by the very sensor reports that scrolled in urgent, crimson glyphs across the great, central holosphere, a sphere which usually charted the predictable, stately orbits of known, classified civilizations. But the glyphs did not speak of order. They spoke of a phenomenon so thermodynamically egregious, so fundamentally antithetical to Volcari principles of energy conservation and controlled entropy, that the data package itself had been tagged with the highest possible designation of primal instability event, catastrophic trajectory. High Arbiter Thalkar, whose tenure spanned 7 cycles of systemic recalibration, extended a primary sensory digit, its motion slow, deliberate, a calculated disruption of the ambient equilibrium designed to convey the absolute gravity of the unfolding crisis. He addressed the silent chamber, his voice a complex, dry resonance amplified by the chamber's acoustic design to feel less like sound and more like a pressure differential in the internal organs of the listeners. Arbiters, we have maintained the quarantine perimeter for the required 700 rotations, an act of supreme diplomatic restraint in the face of blatant, unclassified trespass. The species designated humanity, a Tier 4 irregularity on the current Galactic Index, has demonstrated a wholly unprecedented rate of technological scaling and sector penetration. Their very existence is an affront to the statistical models of orderly galactic evolution, a variable that refuses to resolve into a predictable function. Yet their presence, however disconcerting, has been thus far manageable, a distant noise in the grand symphony of the hegemony. Now, however, the noise has become a scream of physical impossibility. He paused, allowing the weight of the phrase physical impossibility to settle upon the ancient minds present. The image on the holosphere sharpened, focusing on a single, isolated point of stellar debris, a region of space designated by the Volcari as the perimeter of unassimilated chaos. And within that perimeter, a single, flickering, self-propelled object identified as a vessel of human origin. The accompanying data stream from the Deep Void Sentinel array presented an analysis that defied established Volcari thermophysics. The vessel, the sensors reported, was not merely damaged. It was undergoing a localized, continuous, uncontrolled thermal excursion, a process that Volcari science classified as incineration event, internal. The vessel, Thalkar continued, his tone a carefully modulated wave of intellectual incredulity, is operating with an apparent catastrophic breach of its primary confinement systems. The heat signature is vast, a continuous output that suggests the complete, unmitigated combustion of fuel sources or a sustained fusion containment failure of such magnitude that the starship should, by all known metrics, have been reduced to molecular plasma fractions hours ago. The report states verbatim a sustained fire on the starship. Arbiters consider the absurdity, a fire, an uncontrolled, open-atmosphere oxidative event on a vessel in vacuum. And yet the core structure persists. It moves. Our analysts cannot reconcile the observed energy expenditure with the structural integrity of the hull. They report a fire on the starship, yet the ship exists. It is a paradox wrapped in thermodynamic violation, and it is located proximal to the designated Veridian transit node. A ripple of low-frequency anxiety pulsed through the chamber's equilibrium field. Diplomat Sivan, his carapace slightly less opaque than the High Arbiters, indicating a more recent integration into the higher echelons of thought, shifted in his levitation harness. Sivan was the hegemony's primary intellectual conduit to the nascent species of the fringe, a scholar of emergent, unstable sociopolitical systems. His specialty was the modeling of illogical behavior. Arbiter Thalkar, with all due deference to the foundational axioms of Volcari physics, Sivan's voice was softer, a careful counterpoint. We must consider the possibility that our foundational axioms are incomplete regarding this specific anomalous entity. The humans do not adhere to the principles of efficiency. Their historical data is replete with examples of deliberate engineered redundancy and a terrifying philosophical tolerance for operational risk. What our sensors read as a catastrophic thermal excursion or fire, they may perceive as normal operational parameters. I reference the intercepted data packet regarding their sublight drives. The plasma venting appears to be a feature, not a failure. They seem to embrace the chaotic dissipation of energy as a necessary byproduct of power generation, a philosophical position that chills the logical mind, but one which we must acknowledge as functional, given the observed persistence of the vessel. Fleet Commander Krell, a presence of solidified gravity and metallic resonance, intervened from his fortified observation platform, his voice the sound of armor plates shifting under immense stress. Krell represented the hegemony's absolute commitment to self-preservation and the rigorous maintenance of the perimeter. Diplomat Sivan speaks of philosophy, I speak of threat vectors. If this is normal operation, then their very method of travel constitutes a significant contamination risk to any stabilized sector they approach. A starship that operates under conditions that we classify as a state of incineration event is a volatile weapon, whether by design or by sheer, horrifying incompetence. It is approaching the Viridian node, an aperture leading directly into the hegemony's primary stabilization web. We must act with preemptive, stabilizing force. The logical response to an unstable entity on a collision course with order is isolation, containment. He did not use the word destruction, but the implication resonated in the silent spaces of the chamber, a shadow of political necessity draped over the tactical reality. The debate descended into a protracted, agonizing philosophical conflict, a hallmark of the Volcari governance process. They were not a species prone to haste. Their decision-making process modeled on the geological timescales of planetary mantle shifts, ensuring every potential consequence was catalogued, weighted, and accounted for. This current incident, however, was forcing them to process the impossible at a speed that felt to their ancient minds like a temporal cascade failure. The tension was not merely political. It was ontological. The existence of a functioning starship, identified as a human starship, that could sustain a state interpreted as a fire in the vacuum of space, challenged the very basis of their ordered, classified universe. If the humans could violate the principle of energy conservation in such a visually and thermally dramatic manner, and yet remain structurally sound, what other laws of the cosmos were they casually disregarding? Thalkar, sensing the ideological schism, stabilized the debate. The question is not their philosophy, diplomat, nor their threat profile, commander. The question is one of intention. Do we interpret this fire as a signal of distress, a call for a rescue which we are uniquely philosophically disinclined to provide? Or do we interpret it as a deliberate act of territorial demarcation, a display of chaotic power intended to destabilize our perimeter? Sivan countered with measured skepticism, his mind already formulating complex counter-scenarios based on the unpredictable psychologies of the emergent species. If it were a sign of distress, they would utilize the universal low-energy distress frequency, which they have not. If it were an act of aggression, they would utilize projectile or energy-lasing weaponry, which they are not. They are simply existing in a state of high-energy dissipation. The most challenging hypothesis is that it is simply their normal. We risk miscalculating their entire operational paradigm if we project our own need for absolute, cold efficiency onto their methods. Their ships, unlike ours, which are built to minimize energy loss to the point of structural rigidity, appear designed to absorb and manage enormous, wasteful energy fluxes. They are the antithesis of the hegemony's ideal starship, a vessel that operates with such an internal thermal excess that it registers on our arrays as a catastrophic failure, yet it is merely functioning. The arbiters reached a provisional, highly conservative consensus after an agonizing cycle of debate. Absolute non-intervention, but with an accelerated, high-risk diplomatic reconnaissance probe dispatched under the command of Sivan's team. The probe, the Sojourner of Logic, was equipped with the most advanced but inherently Volcari-centric sensory apparatus, designed to analyze stabilization fields and energy confinement systems. Its mission was a single, terrifying proposition: approach the human vessel, the source of the paradox, the ship that was on fire, and attempt a low-energy, non-threatening communication sequence. Commander. Krell was tasked with preparing the entire perimeter defense fleet for an immediate, full-spectrum containment and eradication protocol, should the human vessel make any movement that could be statistically modeled as aggressive acceleration toward the stabilization web. The tension in the crystalline nexus did not dissipate. It solidified, becoming a palpable, crushing pressure of expectation and existential dread. The fate of the hegemony's philosophical purity, its very concept of universal order, now rested on the interpretation of a single, chaotic thermal signature. A human starship operating as if in a state of continuous, controlled inferno. The sojourner of logic moved with the precision and grace of a mathematical function, its hull absorbing ambient radiation with near-perfect efficiency, leaving no thermal or gravitational wake, a ghost of the hegemony's technological maturity. Aboard the Sojourner, diplomat Sivan monitored the approach, his internal processors running 1,000 permutations of potential first contact scenarios. The human vessel, designated Odyssey by intercepted broadcast logs, loomed ahead, a dark, angular shape against the starfield, yet simultaneously blazing with a furious, orange and deep red luminescence that defied the vacuum. It was, quite literally, a vessel on fire. The visual spectrum, a secondary and often misleading metric in Volcari analysis, confirmed the raw sensor data. The hull plates glowed with residual heat, and from several exhaust ports, controlled plumes of superheated plasma vented outward, a constant, spectacular act of thermal rejection that appeared to serve no purpose other than to jettison excess power. The Volcari engineering team was in a state of near-systemic shutdown. Recalibrate the primary thermal sensors to the maximum possible range, Sivan commanded, his voice a tight, steady thread of intellectual control. Filter for structural failure indices, prioritize hull integrity modeling. I refuse to accept a state of permanent catastrophic failure as a stable operating condition. The chief engineer's response was a low, synthesized tone of resignation. Diplomat, we have recalibrated. The indices remain constant. The internal energy readings indicate the primary confinement systems are operating at a sustained energy output that surpasses the maximum theoretical limit of our own system, the Nexus core, by a factor of 1,200%. If this were a Volcari vessel, the entire mass would have transitioned into a rapidly expanding cloud of subatomic particles approximately 2 hours and 47 minutes ago. The Odyssey is not merely surviving this output. The data suggests it is harnessing it. The fire, Sivan, is not a failure of containment. It is the sheer, overwhelming scale of their utilized power, which is being deliberately vented because the vessel cannot utilize all of it at once. This was the first critical reveal, the first hairline fracture in the hegemony's philosophical edifice. The humans were not chaotic. They were simply operating at a power level that the Volcari, with their obsession with efficiency and minimization of waste, had deemed technologically or environmentally irresponsible. Their energy production was so abundant, so casually immense, that the controlled jettisoning of thermal waste was mistaken for an unmitigated catastrophe. The Volcari had built a civilization on the premise of the scarcity of energy. The humans, it seemed, had somehow achieved the superabundance of it, and the resulting behavior, the continuous, spectacular fire, was an unintended consequence of a technology too powerful for its own constraints. Sivan initiated the communication sequence, transmitting a Volcari standard mathematical query, a complex sequence designed to test the target civilization's understanding of universal constants and thereby determine their cognitive capacity and their likely ethical framework. The human response was immediate, not with a burst of incoherent data, but with a perfectly modulated, calm voice speaking a mathematically translated universal common dialect, overlaid with a structural purity that suggested an advanced, almost artificial, level of linguistic synthesis. This is the human starship Odyssey. We acknowledge your contact attempt, designation Sojourner of Logic. Your calculated approach trajectory and stabilization parameters suggest a state of extreme caution and perhaps an unwarranted apprehension. We detect a significant and persistent misinterpretation of our operational status on your sensory arrays. We are not in distress. Repeat, the vessel is operating within normal, controlled tolerances. We understand your sensor readings may classify our drive signature as a thermal failure or fire, but this is simply the controlled venting of excess, non-recyclable plasma resulting from our current system configuration. Please adjust your diagnostic. See parameters and state your intention for proximity. The voice was not aggressive, not boastful, but utterly, unnervingly calm. It was the voice of a technician explaining a routine maintenance procedure, devoid of the emotional chaos the Volcari had projected onto them. The simplicity of the response was a shock. It shattered the complex scenarios of political maneuvering and panic distress that Sivan had modeled. He transmitted his response, abandoning the scripted mathematical sequence for a direct, philosophical query. Human Vessel Odyssey, your operational paradigm, the deliberate, sustained release of vast amounts of energy in the form of uncontrolled thermal discharge, violates the fundamental Volcari principle of entropy-conscious civilization. Your energy signature poses a risk of gravitational and thermal contamination to stabilized star systems. Your very presence appears to be an act of energy-wasteful inefficiency. We seek to understand the necessity of this approach. There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause on the human end, a microsecond of silence that Sivan's mind instantly filled with 1,000 possibilities of philosophical misinterpretation. Then, the voice returned, its calmness unchanged, but with a slight, almost undetectable modulation that suggested a shift in the human's cognitive engagement, a move from routine explanation to a deeper, ethical defense. Diplomat Sivan of the Volcari hegemony, we understand your preoccupation with efficiency. The principle of minimized entropy is an elegant, if inherently limiting, constraint. Our necessity, however, is derived not from a desire for waste, but from a commitment to adaptability. The energy you witness being vented, the fire, is a direct consequence of a drive system designed not for the most efficient long-term stellar travel, but for the fastest possible reaction time and the greatest possible redundancy in a crisis environment. We have prioritized the capacity for immediate, high-delta velocity chain and maximum defensive shielding over the conservation of fuel mass. The human envoy, who identified himself simply as Elias Vance, then proceeded to give an explanation of their wasteful system that was a masterful display of both profound technical knowledge and an unexpected ethical framework. He explained that by designing systems with massive energy overhead, they could withstand damage that would instantly cripple an efficiency-optimized vessel. The fire was the cost of having an instantaneous, full-spectrum power reserve. Vance concluded with a statement that resonated with the chilling clarity of an absolute moral commitment. We accept the waste of energy because it ensures the survival of the crew and the mission, and because the human concept of waste is not merely thermodynamic. True waste is the loss of potential, the failure to protect the conscious mind. We find a greater efficiency in safeguarding the unpredictable variable of life than in conserving the predictable constant of energy. This was the large-scale reveal. The human starship's fire was not a technological failure but a deliberate philosophical choice, a massive energy overhead that represented an ethical priority. The Volcari had valued the purity of their system. The humans valued the resilience of their people. The revelation forced Sivan to confront a terrifying possibility. The humans were not irrational, but operating on a higher, more complex, and ultimately more powerful form of logic that integrated the unpredictable nature of biological survival into their engineering. Sivan relayed the full exchange back to the crystalline nexus, including the data on the Odyssey's energy throughput, data that now, stripped of the fire misinterpretation, showed a species capable of casually generating and managing power on a scale that rendered the hegemony's infrastructure utterly provincial. The nexus was paralyzed. Commander Krell's containment protocol was rendered obsolete. To engage a species that could vent enough power to register as a stellar anomaly would be an act of suicidal recklessness. High Arbiter Thalkar, however, fixed on a single element of Envoy Vance's communication, the phrase, "designed," for the fastest possible reaction time and the greatest possible redundancy in a crisis environment. The debate in the Nexus shifted from how to contain the human threat to why the humans had built their entire technological apparatus around the concept of immediate, catastrophic crisis response. Their wastefulness, their fire, their aggressive redundancy seemed to imply a perpetual state of readiness for a threat far greater than themselves, or even the hegemony. This was the moment where the political tension morphed into a shared, existential fear. The humans were not chaos. They were the reaction to a chaos the Volcari had not even detected. A formal, heavily escorted Volcari diplomatic convoy, stripped of all overt armament and dedicated solely to sensory collection, rendezvoused with the Odyssey at the designated, neutral coordinates, a patch of cold, indifferent void that felt far removed from the stable confines of the hegemony. Envoy Elias Vance himself, an individual of modest physical presence yet radiating an intense, almost gravitational focus, boarded the Volcari vessel, the stabilizer of principles, a deliberate choice on the humans' part to meet on the Volcari's terms and territory, a subtle diplomatic maneuver that spoke volumes of their confidence and their underlying non-aggressive intention. The meeting chamber aboard the Volcari vessel was sterile, designed for psychological neutrality, but the human envoy's very presence disrupted the equilibrium. He moved with an economical grace that belied the tremendous energy that powered his civilization, his expression one of profound, focused seriousness. Diplomat Sivan, seated across a polished, non-reflective black surface, began the true dialogue, cutting through the ceremonial formalities with a directness born of philosophical urgency. Envoy Vance, your people's technological philosophy is a contradiction we struggle to resolve. You possess power capable of terraforming entire clusters, yet you operate with an unnecessary, deliberate wastefulness that borders on the ecologically nihilistic. The Odyssey's signature, the fire, is a constant state of energy crisis to us. Explain the source of this profound commitment to redundancy and the prioritization of immediate, high-risk capability over the proven Volcari method of cold, stable efficiency. You speak of crisis environment. What crisis compels a species with such power to move with such haste and such expense? Envoy Vance leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady, meeting Sivan's complex, multifaceted eyes with an unblinking human sincerity that was itself unnerving in its simplicity. Diplomat Sivan, the Volcari hegemony has spent epochs stabilizing its territory, classifying its threats, and perfecting a civilization that minimizes all external risk. This is a monument to order, and we respect its logic. However, stability requires an accurate understanding of the forces acting upon the system. Your civilization is predicated on the assumption that the cosmos is fundamentally a predictable, manageable system of thermodynamic decay and gravitational certainty. Our experience, and the data we possess, suggests a different reality. Vance reached out and activated a small, self-contained holographic projector he had brought with him. The projected image was not a star chart, nor a tactical deployment, but a complex multispectral graph that flickered with minute, almost invisible variations. It was an image of cosmic background radiation, the faint, thermal echo of the universe's beginning. The Volcari had cataloged and filtered this energy for millennia, classifying it as background noise, an inert constant against which all stable calculations were made. Your sensors, designed for efficiency, filter this out as irrelevant statistical variation. They are calibrated to ignore anything that does not present a clear, immediate, high-energy threat signature. Our ancestors, however, developed a technology that was, by your standards, wildly inefficient. A sensor suite designed to find order within chaos, to prioritize the signal that appeared to be the weakest. Vance's tone dropped, becoming lower, heavier, imbued with the emotional gravity of historical revelation. The fire you witnessed, diplomat, is a byproduct of our preparation to move faster than is thermodynamically sensible. We are not fleeing a local conflict, nor are we engaging in an act of aggressive expansion. We are reacting to a signal in the background noise. For the past 400 of your cycles, the human-maintained data arrays have detected a consistent, non-random variance in the cosmic background radiation. It is a minute distortion, a faint, rhythmic cooling pattern that suggests the localized, systemic consumption of energy and matter on a supergalactic scale. This was the larger twist, the philosophical earthquake that shattered the current conflict. The humans were not a threat. They were a frantic, high-energy warning system. We call it the Void Predator, Vance continued, his voice now a low, resonant drone that commanded absolute attention. It is not a species, nor a fleet, nor a political entity. It is a fundamental existential force that manifests as an absence. Where it passes, star systems are not destroyed. They simply cease to emit the expected background radiation. It is a gravitational and energetic blackness that consumes entire structures of organized matter without the high-energy signature of a weapon or a singularity. It leaves no trace other than the minute, almost undetectable cooling of the residual cosmic energy, a pattern that suggests the ultimate terrifying efficiency, 0W. Zero observable interaction, simply total systemic elimination. He paused, allowing the weight of the cosmic nihilism he had just described to settle on the Volcari arbiters observing remotely from the Nexus. The Volcari hegemony's entire methodology, its obsession with internal stability, its meticulous filtering of background noise for clear threats, has rendered you functionally blind to a threat that operates at the very limits of detection, moving with a patience that transcends your recorded history. The Odyssey's fire is not a failure of our ship. It is the sound of our civilization screaming at maximum throttle, trying to build a collective defensive perimeter and warn those who have built their systems to filter out the most insidious danger. High Arbiter Thalkar, observing the feed from the Nexus, broke his long, ritualistic silence. His voice, transmitted through a secure, high-latency channel, was filled with a tremor of pure intellectual terror. Envoy Vance, this is a claim of galactic-scale existential threat, based on what our systems dismiss as statistical anomaly. Where is the empirical proof? Where is the signature of its approach? Our long-range surveillance has detected no massing fleets, no gravitational anomalies. Vance responded to the relayed query with a quiet dignity. The proof, Arbiter, is the discrepancy that forced this meeting. The proof is that you detected our ship, a vessel of life and function, as a fire, an event of irrational, self-destructive heat. But you failed to detect the true absence, the coldness that is steadily encroaching upon your sector. We possess the accumulated astronomical data of multiple fallen civilizations whose demise was marked by the exact same minute cooling trend in their background radiation just prior to their complete silent disappearance from the stellar maps. They were efficient, stable, and focused on internal order. They, too, filtered out the noise. He then executed the final, most profound reveal. He projected a new sequence onto the holoscreen, a simulation based on the accumulated human data that mapped the subtle cooling pattern onto the galactic structure. The pattern of consumption was not random. It was structured, methodical, and its vector pointed not towards the unstable fringe, but directly toward the largest, most stable clusters of organized matter, the very heart of the Volcari hegemony. The consumption vector would intersect the hegemony's outer stabilized sectors within a time frame that, even by Volcari standards, was impossibly short. The very stability the hegemony had sought to achieve was a beacon, a high-contrast target for the void predator's cold, silent consumption. The crystalline nexus was no longer a place of cold, rational debate. It was an echo chamber of fear and dawning, terrifying comprehension. The ancient arbiters, their intellectual stability shattered by the revelation of a threat that preyed on their very principles of efficiency and stability, moved with a speed and a decisiveness unprecedented in their history. The internal political conflicts, the suspicion of the chaotic, wasteful humans, evaporated under the crushing weight of the absolute, cold external threat. The fire on the human starship, once a symbol of unacceptable risk and incompetence, was now understood as a testament to the supreme ethical imperative of survival and adaptation. High Arbiter Thalkar, his voice now devoid of its former measured resonance and replaced with a tone of raw, pragmatic determination, addressed the human envoy through the secure link. Envoy Vance, the hegemony has analyzed your presented data. Our systems, once calibrated to your specified non-standard spectral shifts, now confirm the existence of the anomalous background cooling trend. The scale and immediacy of the threat are absolute. We accept your claim. We accept that our adherence to entropic efficiency rendered us blind. We must now know, what is the human solution? How do you propose to combat an entity that operates without a discernible signature, that consumes with ultimate zero-waste efficiency? Envoy Vance stood calmly, a lone figure of human resolve against the massive, ancient framework of Volcari fear. His response was the culmination of the entire cultural contrast, a final, definitive statement on the human ethos that had built a civilization capable of running their starships in a perpetual, controlled fire. Arbiter, you seek a weapon, a method of cold, precise eradication, but we cannot fight an entity of pure absence with efficiency. We cannot kill a silence. The void predator is the ultimate expression of order, the final, perfect classification of all matter into nullity. To fight it, we must introduce the ultimate disorder. He detailed the human strategy, a plan so thermodynamically audacious it bordered on the realm of theoretical fiction for the Volcari, the creation of a massive temporary hyperlocalized energy source, a false star, at the projected intersection vector. This star would not be a controlled, long-term fusion reactor, but a temporary, deliberately unstable, high-energy event generated by the synchronized, full-spectrum discharge of a substantial percentage of all available human fleet power, including the wasteful thermal venting of their engine systems, the fire writ large across space. The goal was not to destroy the Void Predator with kinetic or beam energy, but to overwhelm its ultra-efficient, cold consumption mechanism with a sudden, massive, and utterly irrational surge of waste heat and chaotic photonic output. A brief, glorious, self-destructive burst of uncontrolled thermal energy, designed to be the only thing the Void Predator's consumption methodology could not instantly assimilate without a momentary, visible backlash. The resulting anomaly would be detectable for a fraction of a Volcari rotation, providing a window, a mere instant of light against the consuming darkness, for a coordinated strike by conventional weaponry. "Our fire," Vance stated, the word now imbued with a new, sacred meaning, "is our defense. It is the only thing the ultimate coldness of the Void Predator cannot process without a momentary perturbation. We will use the very wastefulness you criticized as our shield and our spear. We will introduce such a degree of irrationality and uncontrolled excess into its environment that it will be momentarily thrown into a detectable structural disharmony." The ensuing weeks were a blur of frenetic, unified action. The Volcari hegemony, driven by the human data and the chilling logic of the proposed counter-strategy, placed its entire industrial and military apparatus under the operational command of the emergent human coalition. The ancient Volcari fleets, optimized for cold efficiency and measured, predictable force application, were retrofitted with massive, purpose-built energy capacitors designed solely to absorb and then release the concentrated thermal waste. That was the core of the human defense plan. The hegemony's rigid social structure, designed for stability, bent and adapted with a speed that startled even the humans, demonstrating that their deep philosophical commitment to logic could, when presented with absolute empirical evidence, override even millennia of cultural conservatism. The combined fleet, a tapestry of cold, crystalline Volcari ships and blazing, on-fire human vessels gathered at the predicted convergence point. The tension was not one of political fear, but of profound, shared commitment. Sivan stood beside Vance on the bridge of the retrofitted stabilizer of principles, observing the gathering energy signatures of the Allied forces. "Envoy Vance," Sivan whispered, the formality of his title a mere habit now, "we misjudged your species fundamentally. We saw the chaos in your energy signatures and projected internal disorder. We now understand that your willingness to embrace the chaotic, the wasteful, the high-risk, is not a flaw. It is a profound ethical choice, a necessary antidote to a universe that attempts to impose a final, cold, annihilating order." Vance nodded, his eyes fixed on the distant, imperceptible edge of the encroaching, cooling anomaly. "We are a species that evolved on a planet that experiences fire every day. We learned early that controlled chaos, harnessed combustion, managed risk, is the engine of progress and the forge of resilience. We learned that the universe is not always benign, and that sometimes you must create a little bit of beautiful, controlled destruction to prevent the final, silent one." The moment of convergence arrived. On Vance's silent command, the combined, massive force of the human and Volcari fleets discharged their accumulated energy. It was not a weapon firing. It was an act of thermodynamic vandalism. Every engine, every capacitor, every thermal vent unleashed its maximum potential in a single, coordinated, blinding, glorious, and utterly wasteful burst of plasma and photonic energy. The space where the fleets gathered did not simply light up. It ignited in a brief, impossible, man-made stellar nova, a massive, screaming fire that dwarfed the earlier signature of the Odyssey, a monument to organized, deliberate waste. For a single, agonizing instant, the ultra-efficient, consuming edge of the Void Predator recoiled. The sudden, irrational influx of chaotic, unassimilable heat caused a micro-scale ripple in its consuming field, a momentary flaw in its perfect, cold order. The cosmic background radiation spiked in the affected area, a momentary, detectable signature of pure thermal noise. "Now," Vance roared, his voice a raw, human sound of command. The Volcari fleets, their efficiency-optimized conventional weapon systems finally given a defined target, unleashed their ordnance in a wave of coordinated, massive force, striking the fleeting anomaly befoe. The cosmic silence could resume its consumption. The result was not a victory, but a momentary reprieve. The Void Predator did not cease. It merely shifted its vector, recoiling slightly from the injection of organized chaos. But in that act of resistance, the humans had accomplished their goal. They had marked the void predator, revealing a transient weakness, providing the Alliance with the crucial, definitive data needed to begin long-term, focused defense. The fire had done its job. As the human and Volcari fleets regrouped in the slowly dissipating plasma haze, the combined bridge was silent, the silence heavy with the promise of a long, terrifying war. The initial philosophical conflict, the debate over a ship that appeared to be burning, had been revealed as a tragic, almost comical misdirection. The hegemony's fear of a localized, high-energy vessel had blinded them to the existential threat that was defined by a profound lack of energy. Thalkar, addressing Vance one last time before the diplomatic channel closed to prepare for the long, hard reality of the coming war, offered a final, philosophical reflection that summarized the Volcari's profound, epical shift. Envoy Vance, we once measured civilization by its ability to conserve, to minimize entropy, to create cold, stable order. We now understand that the highest form of efficiency is the capacity for radical, instantaneous adaptation. We now understand the necessity of your fire. It is the spark of life, the willingness to embrace the necessary, beautiful chaos required to defy the final, consuming coldness of the cosmos. We were afraid of a fire on a starship. We did not understand that the starship was a declaration that we would not allow the universe to go cold. We are no longer the hegemony of stability. We are the architects of controlled, necessary chaos. We stand with humanity ready to burn. The human starship had reported a fire, and the universe had been saved, for now, by the controlled, deliberate expenditure of the very thing the hegemony had sought to eliminate. Spectacular, glorious, and utterly necessary waste. The long night, illuminated by the continuous fire of a united defense, had just begun.